Hello everyone. It has been officially 2 months since the ATD24 International Conference and Expo that took place in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this was my session, Discovery in the Desert, exploring global experiential learning. So I am going to record this presentation. This is basically exactly how I delivered it in New Orleans, minus the interactive elements with the audience. But I've transitioned those into a more on-demand format so that you all can still participate in your own way. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, my name is Brooke Winston. I am currently a Senior Learning and Enablement Manager for a retail technology company, and I was so excited to put together this presentation to explore global experiential learning. Now, today we're going to be talking about what exactly global experiential learning is, why it matters in the grand scheme of things, and then why it matters specifically to us as L&D professionals. We're also going to dive into a specific case study of a global experiential program that was designed very well, and we're going to break down exactly how they did it with specific practices and techniques. So first, what exactly is global experiential learning? Well, everyone might have slightly different definitions for this, but I define it as learning that's designed to be experience first, is specific to worldly or international audiences, and is designed to help people work together better. So for example, the ATD24 conference was a great option or a great example of global experiential learning because it was full of in-depth and immersive experiences. It was designed to help us learn and work better together, and it was crafted for international learning and development professionals from all around the world. So why does this matter? Why does global experiential learning matter to the bigger picture of the world? Well, in no uncertain terms, humans can be crappy to one another. Racism is alive and well. Bigotry, misogynism, hate, and other superior ideals are exhibited every day by many of those around us in our own organizations. The whole world is currently in a state of chaos and turmoil, let alone individual teams at individual companies. Even in 2024, some people feel that they're better than others, that they deserve to be treated differently, and that they can continue solving problems the way that they always have, without issue. But that's exactly why this should matter more to us as learning experts, because we play a role in how humans think of each other and how they treat each other. Whether you work for a corporate company, academic institution, freelance, or something else entirely, what we all have in common is that we help people develop skills. So why not focus on the skills that are universal, global, skills that help humans be better humans to one another, like compassion, collaboration, critical thinking, and reducing bias. We have the potential to take the idea of global experiential learning and use it to bring people together rather than split them apart. We have the power to design experiences that can truly create change. Well, how do we do it? We're going to dive into a global experiential learning program that did just that. Birthright is a multicultural, multilingual, global program for different groups around the world to learn more about who they are and where they come from. Some Birthright organizations include Africa, Macedonia, Greece, Armenia, Croatia, Hungary, Israel. So there's a lot out there. And this time last year, while some people were participating in ATD23, I was actually participating in a Birthright program as a learner. But what I took away was far more impactful than just a few new skills, because I'm a learning designer, so of course I was taking notes. I was looking at how did they structure this program? What were they doing specifically that worked for me as a learner? What activities, ideas, or games could I take away? And how can I extract all of those insights for you all? So in this session, we're going to break down exactly how they did it with 5 specific experiential practices. And those are setting the goal early and challenging initial thoughts, promoting inclusivity with group participation, emphasizing authenticity, balancing digital and physical contexts, and inspiring learning beyond the program. We'll dive into exactly what each practice means, specific tangible techniques to bring these practices to life in our own programs, and examples and stories of how the practice was applied in the Birthright program. And I'm even going to practice what I preach and try to implement as many of these techniques within this actual presentation. So let's see how well I do. Starting with the first experiential practice, setting the main program goal early and challenging your learners' initial thoughts as they go throughout. What does this mean? It means setting the context for your learners before their experience really begins. Everything from there on out can be framed within that context, that goal, that meaning, that intention. Now, we won't dive into how to set goals for learners in this session because there are so many factors that go into it, and there are a lot of goal frameworks and models that exist out there already. But the key that I have found to work is to have one major overarching goal or North Star that's guiding the rest of the program's experiences. By setting the goal early for learners, they can shine each of their experiences in the light of what it then means to that bigger picture. In this way, your program can then go from a telescope mentality where you're tunnel focused on a single thing to a kaleidoscope mentality where every experience could mean something different for every person, enhancing how they understand and interact with the world around them. Now, everyone will likely have slightly different initial thoughts. So how should we go about measuring those initial thoughts and challenging them throughout the program? The first thing we need to do is gather that data. Just like any scientific experiment, we should be measuring our data at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end, because this is how we're going to be able to tell if there's a change in between the answers. Now, global learning programs such as this are hard to measure against typical evaluation levels because there's likely no business impact. There's likely no way to measure behavior change after the experience is over. I actually attended a session at the ATD conference where the presenters said, learning and development without a business impact is a waste of time and money. And I kind of tuned out for the rest of that session after that statement because I wholeheartedly disagree. Some of the best learning I've ever experienced didn't happen for the benefit of a business. It happened for the benefit of the individual, of the person. So more than anything, my goal with this session and with these techniques is to help us measure the learner's ability to open their own minds, challenge their thinking, and hopefully solve problems in new ways. The second technique we can do here is help learners understand where those initial thoughts are coming from. And we can use reflection exercises here to help learners connect with their thoughts and their opinions on a personal level. How do they feel about their opinion? Why do they feel that way? Something I also noticed about the ATD sessions that I attended is that a lot of them mentioned reflection at the end. And they use it as a way to get people to think about, oh, what did you learn during the session? But I actually think there's more ways that we can use reflection. We can use it at the beginning to help learners understand where their initial thoughts are really coming from and how they feel about it. Emotion is a huge part of how people experience the world. So it's important that we, as experienced designers, can encourage emotion, attachment, connection, just as much as we can encourage knowledge retention. The third technique we can do here is challenge learners to defend those thoughts with facts, examples, and resources. If a learner is always in their comfort zone or they're always surrounded by people who agree with them, they never have to challenge what they know. But when we challenge what they know, we can uncover knowledge or skills gaps, and we can unlock the door for learners to enhance these skills. We could use something like debate exercises for learners to defend their thoughts and opinions against others who might disagree. Can they support their thinking with facts, examples, and resources? Again, where are those thoughts coming from? Are their sources credentialed and trustworthy? Or are we amplifying voices that are furthering stereotypes or inaccurate information? Especially when considering global contexts, it's incredibly important for learners to be willing to take in information from multiple sides so that they can formulate and potentially even reframe their opinions. So, what's a specific example of how this practice was applied in the Birthright program? Well, the initial goal we were trying to reach was how each one of us individually defined Judaism. Now, for some, it was a religious thing. For others, it was a political thing. For me, it was just a way to live with equality, kindness, morality, because that's how I was taught. But this program was designed specifically to challenge our initial thoughts and make us think twice about our opinions. One of the ways they did that was by taking us to the National Cemetery to see how the fallen were treated depending on who they were. The cemetery was split into 3 levels. The first level, the ground level, had the most graves. Each grave was the same size, took up the same amount of space, and had the same amount of flowers or trees or foliage in between. Felt very equal. But then we got to the second level up, and it was for state or government officials. These graves were bigger, more spacious, more flowers and foliage in between. Then we got to the third level up, and this level was by far the biggest. There was only one massive grave here for the first person to really lobby for Jews to have a state of their own, and it was a huge open space overlooking the rest of the country, literally from above. My initial thoughts would have said that people shouldn't get treated superiorly in death, even if they had bigger impacts when they were alive. And more than anything, this experience made me challenge my initial thoughts and opened my mind to changing them. With that said, I want to gather your initial thoughts, and I hope to challenge them as we go throughout this session. So for the first activity, I want to set the goal for this session, and that goal is for you to define what global experiential learning means for you. So take a moment, think about it. What does it mean? Does it mean multilingual? Does it mean on demand, so it can accommodate different time zones? Does it mean accessible for learners of different abilities? What does global experiential learning mean to you? And that was the first practice. The second practice to talk about is promoting inclusivity with group participation. This means designing group activities with the intention to boost responsibility, psychological safety, and emotional intelligence, not just engagement. Group activities can be more than just the dreaded group project or discussion board, partnering up with people you don't know or saying whatever you have to say to complete the activity. They can be designed to actually help learners enhance their soft skills, communicate with others, explore new information. So, how do we design group activities to be more meaningful rather than purely productive or purely fun? How do we put these ideas into play in our own programs? The first thing we can do is create scenarios for comfort and trust. It's really hard to force people to trust others, but you can create scenarios to help it along, using something like conversation cards. Basically, it's just a deck of cards, but they have a series of questions that you can ask someone on a variety of topics. Like, what was your biggest fear as a child? Did you ever do something you thought you would regret, but it ended up being amazing? Is there anything that you're worried about that maybe I can help with? These cards were actually super helpful from an accessibility perspective because I have a hidden disability. I have epilepsy, and you wouldn't know that just by looking at me. But now I'm across the world in another country with 45 complete strangers. So I needed to find a few trustworthy members of the group fast so that I could share this with them. And some of these random conversation starters are what helped me find those people that I was most comfortable around. And it allowed us to discover ways that we could help others, even when it was difficult to ask for help. Another thing we can do here is use committees to foster a culture of responsibility and reciprocal exchange. Now, I'm not just the program designer putting in all this work for you, learner, to take. No, you have to put something in too. An example of this from Birthright was how everyone was required to join a committee that offered something to the rest of the group. So for example, the Wellness Committee helped plan walks in the morning and yoga in the evening. Media Committee took photos and videos of everywhere we went and then uploaded those for everyone to access in a Google Drive. Bus Committee focused on making the daily bus rides fun for everyone, like enforcing karaoke for anyone who was late. This mandatory group participation helped create space for us to take responsibility, offer our skills to others, and in turn promote inclusivity from within. The third thing we can do here is spin simple or known games with a targeted lens. So for example, a very simple icebreaker is fun facts, right? What's a fun fact about yourself? But spin it a little. Have everyone write their fun facts down anonymously and try to guess or figure out whose fact it is. When considering global contexts, you could be working with learners who are living in another country, speaking another language, making different money, or believing in different values. So we might assume that Chris is the person whose fun fact is that they traveled to 26 countries instead of Prashant. Because maybe Prashant lives in another country and we might assume that he doesn't have the same life goals or opportunities. This fun fact game then has the potential to surface that bias, those assumptions that we make about others, and challenge what we assume about the world based on the little that we actually know. This can then segue into meaningful conversations and experiences, further building that inclusivity and that trust with each other. An example of this practice applied in the Birthright program was the Outsiders game. So the goal or intention with this game was to see how we might genuinely react to new people joining our little group. In this case, native locals were going to be joining us the next day. How were we going to treat them? We all gathered together as one large group in a circle at first. But then, roughly a third of us left the larger group to go to a different area. Their objective was to create skit ideas to perform to us around how we could include the new people. Meanwhile, our group's objective was a little different. We were supposed to come up with funny rules to follow for when they got back. Like every time they said the word group, we all took a step to the right. Or every time someone touched their hair or their face, we all meowed like cats and did the head, shoulders, knees, and toes dance. So when the smaller group came back to perform their skits, we followed our rules and laughed hysterically. And they felt left out and ignored and made fun of because they actually worked hard on their skits. No one told us that we couldn't just clue them in. We could have just told them the rules of how it all worked and they could have done it with us. But we didn't. Our human nature was to play the game innocently and just have fun. And that was the point. It emphasized just how easy it is to unintentionally treat others as outsiders. This activity was designed to enhance our critical thinking and collaboration skills, not just be an engaging game that took up time. It's one thing to tell a learner, be more inclusive. It's another thing to design an experience that will make them fail, because that failure will help them learn. So I'm going to try and practice what I preach again with a little activity, and we are going to spin a simple game with a targeted lens. For us today, we're going to play Never Have I Ever Global Learning Edition. So if you don't know how to play, basically you put a hand up, and every time I say something that you have done, you put a finger down until there are no more left. So we're just going to list a few, but think about the other people who would potentially fall into one of these categories and how you compare to others. So never have I ever attended a global or an international learning conference before. Never have I ever needed to translate someone else's learning materials into my own native language. Never have I ever engaged in or designed leadership training for leaders of another nation. Never have I ever traveled for a learning experience. All of these things speak to what we have done in our lives and what other people have done in their lives. And it shows that instead of making assumptions, we can just be more inclusive about our experiences and theirs. Just with that quick little example, you can see that spinning simple games with targeted lenses does not have to be hard, but it can get us to challenge our assumptions and work together better. So that was the second experiential practice. The third experiential practice to talk about is emphasizing authenticity. So what does this mean? Well, it means creating an environment that's realistic, genuine, and encourages learners to be willing to immerse themselves in the unknown, because that's life, ever-changing and highly unknown. Now, when we talk about authenticity in global contexts, we're talking about different cultures, values, practices, clothing, food, languages. When we first arrived in Israel, one of the main things I noticed was that all of the official traffic and road signs were written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Arabic, and English. But outside of official road signs, everything was either written in Hebrew or Arabic, and everyone either spoke Hebrew or Yiddish. English was practiced, but not prevalent. Authenticity in global contexts then helps to broaden our perspectives from what we already know and are familiar with. Again, opening our minds, challenging those initial thoughts. So, what are some tangible techniques that we can use to put this practice into reality? The first is to humanize the experience using storytelling and diverse perspectives. Humanizing the context of information is just as important as the information itself. For example, we learned about several other groups of people living in Israel besides Jewish people. We visited a Druze village, a Catholic women's shelter, a Bedouin tribe out in the middle of the desert. Telling stories and exposing these differing perspectives is a great way to humanize context and frame information in that kaleidoscope mentality. For corporate or academic L&D, maybe this looks like a dynamic story-based training, where the learner can choose to go through the story as a certain character, and maybe the story changes based on the perspective of that character. So Ellie, the disabled Asian woman, might have a different experience of the story than Paul, the Black veteran man. The idea is that a learner could go through this story multiple times as different characters and really see those differing perspectives and really challenge their own perspective at the same time. Another thing we can do is create scenarios that use all 5 senses, or as many senses as possible, to really deepen immersion and connection. So remember how I said almost all written signs were in Hebrew or Arabic? Well, this is where my visual communication and my other senses became ultra important. Since I wasn't always able to read the information, I relied on what I could see, smell, hear, taste, feel. You might not have noticed that my slide designs are actually visual memories. These are the real experiences that I had during this program represented on screen. So this is one of the ways that I'm trying to emphasize authenticity with visual communication. Another way to apply this is to play music during games or activity times and that music could highlight certain cultures or certain languages. Every extra sense that you can offer someone deepens that immersion and the overall experience. The third thing that we can do here is integrate tangential activities throughout the program. So, for example, let's say that you're teaching people about empathy. A tangential activity might look like asking them to attend cooking classes, where they create a recipe from a new culture or country. Maybe it's a lunch and learn cooking class. Maybe you guys host it. Creating that food is a tangential activity to becoming more empathetic to that group of people, a different group of people from themselves. It could also look like asking learners to put together a short learning jingle, something musical, but they have to use a different language that they're not familiar with. These tangential activities add to the authenticity of the environment. They incorporate more of the senses that we just talked about, and they help learners strengthen their global skills more and more and more. Creating these opportunities is what allows learners to really explore the world around them and embrace new perspectives. Speaking of broadening our perspectives, there's a quote that we were told in the beginning of the program that rang true all throughout, and it was, 2 people, 3 opinions. What it means is that everyone thinks slightly differently, and knowing one person's way of thinking says absolutely nothing about another person's way of thinking. Everyone has a unique perspective. One of the ways the Birthright program was designed to emphasize authenticity was for us to interview or ask locals different questions and compare the information. So we would walk around different local communities asking nice strangers the average cost of rent in their area, the demographic of the people in their neighborhood, what kinds of entertainment they chose on their weekends. And we learned some cities like Jerusalem were far more conservative, and you could tell by how people dressed, spoke, behaved. And other cities like Tel Aviv were much more laid back. They were akin to a fast-paced city with lots of tech and restaurants and buildings and things to do. After meeting with these communities and understanding each of their unique identities and perspectives, my thoughts about that initial goal were challenged just a little bit more. So let's go ahead and move into activity mode again. I want to do a bit of a brainstorm. Let's say that you're designing a leadership development program for your organization or your company. What's one way that you could bring global authenticity to this leadership development program? So I want you to think about that question for a moment. Some of the answers that I got in my ATD session from my participants included having us design leadership activities that are prevalent in different cultures. So if leaders from different nations practice leadership in different ways, we can include activities that are more culturally representative to them. Another example that somebody gave was having learners tell their own stories of leadership from their global perspectives. Some people are coming from countries or nations that are more diplomatic, some are more autocratic, and their stories of leadership are a little bit different than what we might be used to. So think about those. Brainstorm how you could bring authenticity into a leadership development program. And just know that these are not radical ideas. These are things that we could be building into our programs, into our organizations today. So that was emphasize authenticity. Now we're moving on to the 4th experiential practice, which is balancing digital and physical contexts. Basically, this just means not fully relying on one or the other. Allow them to work together. For example, in Birthright, some of the physical experiences needed digital aspects. At one point in the trip, we attended a geopolitical lecture to learn about the conflicts that had been occurring between Israel and other countries for the past hundreds of years. And in the middle of that lecture, everyone's phone alarms started going off because airstrikes were headed our way. So we all had to get out our phones, look up the current strike situation, and figure out where the nearest shelter was. And even though we were in a physical context, in class, we still needed that digital aspect to truly achieve authenticity. So considering that some experiences need to be both physical and digital, how do we balance both contexts? The first thing that we can do here is set distinct purposes and boundaries for each context. So digital contexts can be necessary for modern processes and efficiencies, or in our case, maybe using AI tools to develop our information quicker. But maybe physical contexts are a lot better when you need to design an experience that just can't be simulated, or maybe to help learners practice their soft skills with others in a real context. In our world, this could be as simple as maybe having an on-demand digital space for people to ask questions and a standing live Q&A forum once a month or something like that for those questions to be answered and discussed in a group. Another thing we can do here is create blended scenarios for physical and digital contexts to work together. Now, I'm not talking about whole blended programs where there are some videos, some live portions. No, I'm talking about single experiences that include both contexts. So for example, if you work in person or hybrid at an office, you could do something like a visual scavenger hunt activity for new hire onboarding. This is both physical and digital because learners can walk around the office, walk around the area, take photos and really visualize different scavenger hunt items, collaborate and meet their colleagues, and ultimately learn their way. So it's a great way to onboard them in a physical and digital way. Building on top of that, the third thing we can do here is create opportunities for learners to solve problems using these contexts. Now, don't forget, some of the main skills that we're trying to enhance are collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving. So how do we use these contexts to continue pushing those buttons? One great way that you could do this in a corporate or potentially software-based company is by hosting a hackathon. Basically, a hackathon is just a competition over a very short period of time, like 24 hours or less. And it allows people from different teams to get together and form their own little groups. They get to solve a problem, their own problem of their choosing, and come up with a net new solution, again, of their choosing. It doesn't even have to be something that they're dealing with in their day-to-day work either. It can be completely out of the box. So this kind of idea is really great because it emphasizes how to use physical and digital contexts in a collaborative and inclusive way so that you can work with others and solve problems. So how is this practice applied in the Birthright program? Well, my example here is actually of me trying to apply an either-or mentality, digital or physical, and why it didn't work. So when I was there, I wanted to get a Hebrew tattoo that memorialized something my late grandparents had always said to me, which was defy mediocrity. The problem? I was not fluent in Hebrew, and I didn't want to wind up with a tattoo on my arm that said ham and egg sandwich for the rest of my life. Now, I tried diving into this challenge with a digital-first mindset. I used digital translation apps to convert the phrase from English to Hebrew. But something to know about Hebrew is that most written Hebrew does not include what's called nukud. Now, these are the dots, dashes, squiggles, and any other extra symbols that help you determine what a letter is, and ultimately what that word is and what that sentence is. So without nukud, without these extra symbols, my digital translations were all kinds of wrong. I couldn't just use a digital mindset for what was going to be a very physical experience. I needed both. So I turned to working with 5 separate locals, unrelated to each other, to create the phrase "survivre la bonne minute," which means refuse mediocrity. I moved forward getting the tattoo, and just for shits and giggles, I decided to Google Translate image scan my arm after the tattoo was done. But guess what happens when Google can't tell a B apart from a V? It thinks my tattoo says Serbian and escorts. So this example just proved to me that even though our digital resources are amazing, they're literally the best they've ever been, they still aren't everything. We still need to balance our digital contexts with physical aspects to properly reach our goals. So let's go ahead and practice what we preach again. Together, let's think about the last time that you personally enjoyed a learning experience where there were physical and digital aspects. If you want an example, just recently I went hiking with my partner's family, his mother, his nephew, and his nephew is very inquisitive. And he was asking, what kind of plant is that? What kind of tree is that? What kind of rock is that? What kind of bird is that? I do not know. I do not know the answers to any of those. So what we did was we pulled up an app. I think it was called Seek by iNaturalist. And you scan the item that you're talking about, and it tells you what kind of plant that is, what kind of tree that is, what kind of rock that is. So it was really interesting because we were able to integrate that digital aspect into our physical experience and actually learn something. So take a moment, think about it. What's the last learning experience that you enjoyed that included both aspects? And that concludes the fourth experiential practice. The fifth and final experiential practice to talk about is inspiring learning beyond the program. This basically means encouraging and providing direction for extra experiences if learners want it. Some people, not everyone, but some people will want to continue working on these skills after the program completes. It'd be even better if we can offer them recommendations of where to turn. Best of all, many of the greatest learning programs of the last few years were created by the people in our community, participating in our networks online. We basically have first dibs on the world's leading learning ideas. So how can we gather these ideas, inspire learning, further those global skills, both in our programs and beyond? The first thing that we could do is create and recommend optional experiences that do not expect anything in return. Let learners choose certain aspects to participate in or not. Autonomy and self-direction are core tenets of adult learning theory, which means that adults need to feel some sense of control over what and how they learn. The same way that the participants at ATD24 got to choose which sessions they ultimately wanted to attend. The no expectations thing refers to the fact that this is solely for the learner's experience, solely for their benefit. It's not for them to submit an assignment or complete a quiz or prove that they learned something. A great example of this that my organization recently did as an initiative for May, which, if you didn't know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, they created Mental Health Bingo, where the 25 squares on the bingo card are 25 different mental health practices that people could do over the course of the month. And people loved it. They actually did it, and they submitted their bingo cards. So activities like this, they're not hard. They're already created and templated out there for us. We can work smarter, not harder. Another thing that we can do here is partner with and recommend other educational experiences. We don't have to do everything ourselves within our own programs. Took me a while to learn that one. But we do want to make sure that any additional education we recommend is designed intentionally, is evidence-based, and has the end learner's skills in mind, not a product or a company. Have a short list of recommendations at the ready in case somebody wants it. So for example, in this session's handout, which I've added to this video's description on YouTube, I have over 140 resources and recommendations for specific podcasts, YouTube channels, books, tutorials, all sorts of different pieces of information related to designing programs, because that's my audience. So for you and your audience, you can include recommendations for global events, workshops, groups, communities to join online, volunteering opportunities. There's really a lot that could go here. And the third thing we can do is simply find ways to motivate learners to keep going and to keep practicing these global skills even when we're not around. Now, we all probably know about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. But if not, intrinsic just means it's a personal, internal motivation to want to do the thing. Like, I want to feel better about my skills at something. Whereas extrinsic motivation means it's an external motivation to want to do the thing. Like, I want someone else to notice that I'm better at this and give me a prize for it. That's external. Now, for extra, optional, additional learning experiences that not everyone may want to participate in, this is where extrinsic motivation makes the most sense. So this could include offering prizes for certain completions, maybe an award for certain skills being exemplified, working with your organization to see if extra benefits could be offered, like extra paid time off. Or a lot of organizations already have a program implemented where you can give out recognition points. In my organization, they're called tacos. And these can be exchanged for actual cash. So there's a lot of ways that you can motivate and inspire learners to keep going and keep practicing these skills even after they leave your program. In the Birthright program, they applied this practice with extra optional activities. So when we were camping in the Negev desert, there was an optional stargazing meditation activity. Those of us who wanted to participate hiked about a quarter mile away from the campsites into the deeper, darker part of the desert until there was nothing around us in all directions. Nothing left, nothing right, nothing ahead. 360 degrees of desert, sky, and darkness. So we all laid down and looked up. My sight started to adjust and I could see the stars clearly. It was barren, but beautiful. And even though we were basically in a vast, dark void, it actually seemed lighter than when we were at the campsite surrounded by fire. I started to think about how sometimes that perspective is true in life. Sometimes we expect things to be huge darks or huge brights, black or white. People are inherently good or inherently bad. But life is more complicated than that. Humans are more complicated than that. We can recognize all of the extra noise and information. We can internalize what it all means. And because we're humans, we can adjust and grow. This was my discovery in the desert. We can either allow our perspectives to be defined by our initial thoughts and assumptions forever, or we could allow our perspectives to evolve based on the state of the world around us and what we learn about it. This is what made me realize that focusing on universal, global skills will have so much more benefit and impact to the world outside of a single company, product, or organization. We can use our expertise to truly inspire lifelong learning. So that is it. Those were the 5 global experiential practices that we can employ in our own programs. Set the goal early and challenge initial thoughts. Promote inclusivity with group participation. Emphasize authenticity. Balance digital and physical contexts. And inspire learning beyond the program. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that this presentation was designed intentionally to see if I could challenge your initial thoughts. So I want you to come back to that very first reflection that we did. What was your definition of global experiential learning? What did it mean to you? And now that we've gone through this material, were your thoughts or opinions challenged at all? Does it mean something new or different to you now? Do you plan to change anything that you're doing in your real world, in how you design and develop global learning programs. Take a moment to think about that. And with that comes the end of my presentation. I just want to close out and say thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I'm very impressed. If you would like to find me on my portfolio website, my LinkedIn, my TikTok, obviously you're on my YouTube, anything like that, scan the QR code, or all of these links are also in my LinkedIn. I would be happy to connect and network with all of you. Thank you so much for attending this session. If you would like access to those 140 plus resources I mentioned, they are going to be in the session handout linked in the YouTube description. Other than that, thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.